Hey, welcome back to Taste Kitchen. This is another one of our Wine Lab series, which is going to be a virtual tasting today. And I've got a very special wine with me, and that is King Estate. And we are going to be exploring 3 different Pinot Noirs that are coming to you from Willamette Valley, one of the best wine regions, I think, in America today. And with me, I've got their sommelier, which is Miss Jess Brantley. Great to have you on the show, Jess.
Pleasure to be here, Paul.
All right, so Jess, you've been with King Estate kind of on and off, got a little bit about your backstory. Tell me a little bit about King Estate, the vineyard, a little bit about how you guys go about your wine production.
Sure. You know, Willamette Valley is such a special growing region, really in the world. And one of the commitments of many of the wine growers is on sustainable farming. And to me, one of the really special aspects of King Estate is that it's the largest certified biodynamic vineyard in the country. So we have over 1,033 that we farm biodynamically. And this just means we treat the whole system really integrated and as a whole.
Interesting.
So you can't fix one problem in the vineyard without addressing another. And we have a number of ways that we do this. And this is how we end up sustaining the land for future generations. So we have wine to look forward to in the future, and also how we create complexity and really delicate, beautiful wines that express this truly special place here at King Estate.
Yeah, I've got a ton of notes about Pinot Noir. It's still one of my favorite wines. I love both it as a general wine to drink with almost anything, and then also some very select vineyards for targeted tasting with certain kinds of food pairing. So, and of course, Willamette Valley is still what I think is the top Pinot Noir production, region in the country. So it's going to be fun breaking down each one of these. I was looking into the history of this, and this was something I learned, is that Pinot Noir was actually introduced into Willamette Valley in 1965 and brought in from a clone, which we're going to be talking about a clone today. Mm-hmm. And it was a French clone, a Burgundy clone. And I thought, wow, what an interesting way for Pinot to actually come to America. What a great story. I love that. So let's get into the first one, which is going to be our high wire. And talk to me a little bit about the high wire itself. Let's kind of give you a label shot there. And tell me a little bit more about this wine.
Yeah, this is one of our lovely vineyard designate wines. We have small production wines that really just go out to our wine club. And then if we have enough left over, we're able to open them up to the general market. And this is a beautiful wine that comes from our estate, from the Domaine here. And over the years, Block 4C has just really stood out to the winemakers. It has a high wire trellis, so wonderful sun exposure to let those grapes really fully ripen to phenolic ripeness and bring all those flavors of complexity. And as you were talking about clonal history, this one also has a great clone background, one of those suitcase clones, as they like to call them, that lots of legends, they were smuggled in suitcases from France and planted here in the Willamette Valley. And it did take many years to see which clones would grow and succeed in which sites, because we have a whole myriad of soil types and different aspects within Willamette Valley. But this is clone 538, and this is known as the Colmar clone, originating from Colmar, France, in Alsace. And it can be quite dark fruited and very spicy. And another special element about the high wire itself is that this is both a biodynamically farmed wine, but also we applied biodynamic winemaking tenets to this wine as well.
Okay.
So it means that it's all native fermentations, no commercially propagated yeast. So really allowing the flavors of the vines to show through here in this wine with as little intervention as possible.
Interesting with
the fruit on this clone is a little bit more dark fruited than some of the others that we will taste later on.
Let's get a little bit of this in the glass. And I just want to bring enough in there so people can kind of see the color on this one. Great color. I love this color on this wine.
It's quite dark.
Oh, and that's such a amazing nose.
Mm-hmm. It's an incredible balance of earth and fruit in Willamette Valley, and you tease out different aspects of this from specific vineyards and specific clonal mixes. And here we have that very focused clone 538 flavor with spice, dark fruit, really rich and vibrant, and a little bit of subtle floral essences to it, some sort of almost a dried violet layer to it.
Yeah, I feel like but it also has a warmness to it, a very unique kind kind of back palate that kind of really makes this one stand out. I like the fact that it's got what I'm picking up is more of a caramel and vanilla feel and look and smell.
Absolutely.
I love
And
this.
I think some of that warmth may even speak to the vintage itself. 2016 really was an impeccable vintage here in Oregon. It was a bit warm in the beginning of the season, but then cooled off towards the end and remained dry. And we were able to harvest before the rains came, which is very important here in Oregon to make sure your fruit is clean and pure and you get all the flavors you want without any of the possible disease pressures that may come once the rains hit. So this is very clean, pure fruit with all those beautiful layers that come from the soil that this is grown in as well. That specific block is bell pine soil, which is a marine sediment soil. Those vines really have to struggle to get what they need and go deep down into the root system. And while doing that, they're able to access and develop complexity that translates into the wine in different ways from each site.
Yeah, so kind of a hearty. And you can kind of tell that just in the wine coloration here. It's a really nice Pinot Noir. I think some of these Pinot Noirs come out a little bit pale and not necessarily a great backbone. This one definitely is not one of those. I love that.
Absolutely.
Now, if you were looking to pair this wine, what would you say as a somm, really understanding King Estates, where would you take this wine in terms of a menu?
Sure. And what I do love about Pinot is it is very flexible with food. You do have nice firm structure, but you don't have overly aggressive tannins. So it can be quite a crowd pleaser. It can take you through the beginning of a meal with appetizers that even have seafood in them, if you're careful, with rich salmon and rich buttery sauce seafood. But then carrying it through a meal, because it does have that depth that we were speaking to and that firm structure, you can even eat this with filet mignon or richer beef. And also, I love to have this with pork, tying it in with some sort of sauce that teases out the berry elements with either a cherry compote or a cherry mostardo, some sort of sauce on the meat to really bring together these fruited flavors.
Yeah, that's one that I think would stand up definitely to a red meat dish for sure. Okay, so that's a good one. And let's kind of break down also, this had a wine enthusiast rating at 93 points. So for our audience and our operators out there that are listening in or watching, that is the King Estate. It is the High Wire, the 2016, which is a 538 clone. That's one I think you might want to look for adding to your menu. We're going to jump over here to our Croft, which is our next one. So a good label shop right there. I love you guys' label. You really have, you've kind of brought it all together there. It's got that classic vineyard feel, but also at the same time very modern and kind of eclectic at the same time. I like that. How long is
think about wines too. I like that.
There you go. How long has the vineyard been in place there?
Sure. So they began planting and founding King Estate here in 1991. And then over the years, it was progression of the buildings of the winery itself. And now, while you're waiting on establishing those vines for the first 3 years to make sure you have fruit that's complex and will make a suitable wine, what you can do is work with other growers in the area. And that's what this Croft here represents. King Estate founded the winery, but they needed some fruit to produce some wine with in the beginning while they were waiting on their grapes. So they found growers in the area that were committed to the similar farming practices. And the Croft vineyard is just a bit north of us, and it was established in 1985. So these vines are a little bit older than what we have on our estate, and they also farm organically. And our winemakers have always loved the fruit that have come out of this vineyard, so that they've continued to make a single vineyard wine from this. It also goes into some of our larger Pinot Noir production wines, but they've always made sure to keep a specific vineyard designate that could really represent the clonal mix and specific site of this wonderful vineyard. And it is similar soil to the High Wire that we talked about before, but the clonal mix is a little bit different on it. So you will taste some different flavors in there for sure.
Interesting. All right, let's get this one in the glass. Take a nice little beautiful pour here. Now this one has a unique color as well. It's also interesting. Spin that right there. All right, here we go. Definitely a different aroma for sure.
Mm-hmm. And Croft tends to throw some really earthen tones that to develop into these beautiful truffle mushroom characters that really pair beautifully with food. And you can
I
tease
like
out those
that.
earthen elements.
So this one in itself, this is a 90-point wine. This is a great piece, and of course it's got very fruit forward, but at the same time it's kind of got a very unique body to it at the same time. So which is usually not the case in very fruit forward wines. So I like that about this one. If I'm looking to pair this one, where would you go with this?
You know, again, this one, because it is a little bit more red fruited as well, you can really take it to even a charcuterie and cheese platter to begin your meal.
That's perfect.
Because once you start pairing these dark fruited wines with some really creamy, rich cheeses, and even some harder cheeses, you can really tease out these harmonious flavor pairings. And I always love to pair it also with, as I said, a charcuterie board that has some sort of dried fruit element to pull together those prosciutto and cranberry elements that come out of the wine itself. So I like this one to begin it with some of those cured meats and beautiful flavors.
I think that would be a great selection, a nice one. Great to have a sommelier on here giving us that kind of instruction. Let's talk a little bit about French oaking and maybe the process itself, because that's a unique process in creating a great wine, especially, and you don't find that necessarily that often. So tell me a little bit about that process.
Sure. So our winemaking team is always very careful to find the right balance of oak. We don't ever want those oak flavors to dominate those beautiful expressions of the site that we are able to keep throughout the winemaking process. So dialing in the amount of new oak is extremely important. This Croft has a 26% new French oak, but it is aged for 14 months in total oak. But because not all of that is new, you're not going to cover up those really nuanced, delicate flavors. You're really just going to bolster them with that sweet oak spice. So you'll add a little bit of that cinnamon and nutmeg, but it won't overpower any of those beautiful earthen layers with nice cranberry and raspberry elements that shine through. So we also like to use a very tight grained wood, which for the same thing doesn't impart too much flavor on top of the wine itself. It just allows a more gradual application of the oak, not to overwhelm any of those delicate flavors. So again,
this
14
is a good
months
one.
there, and we dial that in a few months, and depending on the vineyard and depending on the vintage, because all of those different conditions in the wine can require a little bit, you know, if it's a really cold vintage and we didn't necessarily get the depth we wanted, we might use a little bit more oak to add that during the aging process. So the winemakers have these tools that they can adjust each year to match the vintage and those conditions of the growing season.
Very cool. Now I've noticed just in letting this wine get some air, that when you first put that in the glass, if you go to the nose directly, it has a different, kind of a whole different front nose than what I'm getting now. Now it's getting a lot more oxygen. The wine is almost taking almost a different state. What's happening right now with this wine?
So I would absolutely agree that it evolves as it interplays with oxygen. You know, that's one reason we swirl it in the glass before we dip our noses down in there. And that's a way to sort of force that process for us to tease what we can out of it. But in the same way, if we decant it or we allow it to sit in the glass, and just in the same way it does in barrel, it interacts with oxygen and it's going to tease out those phenolics in a different way. And we can experience them on the palate as they evolve as well. And that's another fun way to carry it through a meal. Because it does evolve as we have conversation through a meal, as we talk and evolve. So it's interesting even to go back to something you've tasted several hours later and compare it to something fresh out of the bottle and see how it's evolved and see what point you like to drink that wine. Sometimes we'll open a bottle of wine and we don't like it right away. It's too tight. It needs some time to really open up and let those flavors show itself.
Yeah, for sure. We're going to jump to our third wine, and as we get into that one, I want to talk a little bit about King Estates and kind of how you guys really kind of prepare for next year's, your next year's crop and kind of the process of what vineyards have to go through. Because I think a lot of times people maybe don't necessarily understand just how deep you have to go to really get a great wine out of the areas like that. So can you talk to us a little bit about that process as you guys prepare for a next round of harvest there?
Sure, absolutely. Early in the season, I think the first ramped up part in the vineyard is when we're pruning, because you really have to train those vines. And on our vineyard, we have about 425 acres planted to vines, and they're all different hillsides, so they each have different needs. So we have to prune those vines to reach the amount of sun exposure that they need, control the leaves on the vine so we can really expose those fruit to get the sun it needs. In some areas, there may be a lot of sun exposure, so we may want to protect the grapes a little bit from too much sun. But it is tedious and painstaking to go through the vineyard,
Yeah.
and you really have to assess each vine and how it needs to be processed. And we break it down into blocks, and we have wonderful resources where they've recorded history over the years specific to each block and what it's responded to. And maybe we have to pull up vines and replant because we didn't like what was happening in that block. And that's one wonderful aspect of King Estate, is that they're not afraid of innovation. If something's not working, let's change it, because what we're trying to do is make the best quality wine here. And one thing that makes our wine special is that we are committed to small lot fermentation. So those small blocks that we prune differently, that we farm a little bit differently, we take them into the winery in small bins, and we actually vinify in small tanks. So we keep those small lots separate from the crush process all the way through to fermentation to blending. And this allows our winemakers to create a very balanced wines, because fruit that comes off of the hilltop is going to taste very different than fruit down at the bottom.
Yeah.
And it is painstaking and tedious. I will say that if you ever walk through our winery, you'll see some large tanks for blending, but mostly where the fermentation happens is very small tanks. And this is for all of our tiers of wines. We use the same
Interesting.
winemaking approach. And this is how we're able to retain those very focused, special flavors, and how our winemakers are able to discover that High Wire was so special from Block 4C.
Right.
Because we kept all that
Yeah.
separate through the way. And with the Domaine here that we're about to taste next, we're able to blend all those beautiful pieces of our vineyards together to create an incredibly balanced wine that really expresses right here what this estate wants to say.
All right. Well, leading into it, this is the 2016 Domaine from King Estate, and of course a wine enthusiast score at 92. So this is going to be an interesting wine. Let's kind of roll into this one. Great color. And with this wine, you guys go through a process of cold pressed. Explain that to our audience and to our wine buyers out there.
So cold press is a more gentle extraction. There are different ways that you can get tannin and color into your wines. If you do this very hot and fast, you're going to get a lot of flavors really quick. They're oftentimes very forward and bold. But to really tease out those delicate, really nuanced, layered flavors, it takes a cold, lengthy process to allow the time to share its story with you. And that's what this cold press does. And that's one of those elements that the winemaking team does with many of our wines, to really gain that depth of color that we were talking about, but also that depth of flavor in the glass that we need as well.
Yeah. This is a great wine. The taste on this is absolutely fantastic. I love the body. It's got a great nose. The whole, it's very earthy in a sense. I guess maybe some black tea elements or something in here.
Absolutely.
It's not as quite as fruit forward, which even though I do love fruit forward wines, but this one is definitely special. I can see how this is a 92 pointer for sure. Now, if I'm going to pair this one, where am I going with this one on the menu?
So to me, I think this is very vibrant and red fruited, and the acid is just so bright on the finish. I almost want a citrus element with this. So to me, a nice dense fish with a lemon butter sauce would really bring all of this together in a beautiful way. Just teasing out that beautiful acid and bringing it together. And also, I would love to eat this on a salad with a vinaigrette with a really beautiful grilled chicken, because you can bring together so many different foods. Often salad is hard to pair with, especially with a vinaigrette, but Pinot Noir is so versatile because you have those big balanced flavors, but you have that bright acid where you can just take it wherever you want to go. And I find this one a little more delicate and red fruited, and it's just so vibrant. It's just, it's singing right now, but it's also going to be stunning 10 years from now.
Yeah. Well, being a 2016, this is still a great vineyard year for you guys. How do you determine as a vineyard, when do you feel like, hey, this is going to be a great crop this year? We're going to see some amazing product coming out of it.
It's never over till all the fruit is in the winery. Harvest is an incredibly stressful time because that's exactly what you're waiting for. You need the right ripeness on the fruit, but you can't let it go too long because then you're going to lose that acid. You also have to keep your eyes on the rains because once those come, you really lose a lot of the complexity as the fruit gets saturated with water. So I think that once we bring all that fruit into the winery and we can breathe a little and we know that we know what the growing season was, and we know that there are no more weather challenges to confront, just logistical challenges at that point, that we can really say this fruit is impeccable, or we can say there were some challenges with this fruit and we're going to have to treat it a little bit differently. And that's one thing I always like to consider. Sometimes we think, oh, that was a bad vintage, that was a bad year, there were so many rains. But what often can come out of that is because we have to be so meticulous in sorting the fruit to find the really good grapes, that often it can turn out even better wine because you're really focusing on just the quality and you're having to do away with some that weren't up to what they needed to be just because of growing conditions. But each year tells a new story, but we're very lucky here in Oregon to have, especially Willamette Valley, to have fairly predictable growing seasons and just such a lush, rich agricultural valley here with some beautiful products that we produce.
Yeah, I'm still amazed at the number of vineyards in Oregon that are able to produce wine at this level, because this quality it's superseding anything you can even expect. Even I in many cases will put this up against some of the best French Pinot Noirs out there, and it's amazing to see the amount of, I guess, evolution that especially Willamette Valley has come over the last 30 years or so. So it's pretty cool to watch the number of wines come out of there. It's going to be great. If I was picking today, I'd probably go with the Domaine as my number one today. This is a great, great wine. I love that one, 92 pointer. So for those of you who are listening in, that's my pick for the day. Hopefully you'll get a chance to try all three of these, both in the High Wire and in the Croft of King Estate. And I think you're going to be pleased with any of them. But for me, and every palate is a little different, the Domaine wins the day for me. So Jess, let's wrap up here. And I want to kind of go into, just as if you're looking for an operator that's saying, hey, I need to pick one or two of these wines for my menu today. And let's pick a cuisine style, since you were kind of talking more on the seafood line. I'm a seafood and steak restaurant, and I've got to maybe pick one or two of these. What would be your recommendation for that particular operator?
It's really hard because these are three of my favorites. But I would say the Domaine, because it is so versatile in that structure that it can carry a table of four through four different beautiful entrees across the board, from those rich steak and to those more delicate seafood dishes. And then also, I'd have to go with that Croft because of the ageability and how it develops over time. That's one that a restaurant can buy and put in their cellar, forget about it, serve it 3 years from now, and charge whatever they want because it drinks stunning. But also you can pop that bottle and serve it right now. It's firmly structured, flexible, and just really showcases the gorgeous terroir of Willamette Valley. Yeah, for sure. Listen, I've had Jess Brantley, the sommelier there at King Estate. It's been great having you on the show here in Taste Kitchen. Thanks for stopping in. My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Paul. Absolutely. All right, so all of you who are looking at virtual wine tastings, maybe for your restaurant or your operation, I think this is a great way, if you've got access to a phenomenal sommelier that can help guide your audience and maybe your own guests and patrons through exploring some different wines. This is probably a good way to go about it. So definitely you should be trying that as an operator, or maybe even as a vineyard, to look at doing some virtual tastings, because it does give you guys the opportunity to kind of expose some new wines to your audience, and definitely try some things that are a little different and give some education out there to you. If you are watching or listening to this on YouTube, make sure and subscribe. And of course, if you're on the podcast side for Foodable, make sure and subscribe to some of those shows as well. You can catch all of those at foodabletv.com. Click on the shows tab and you'll see an array of podcasts and video shows that are perfect for your restaurant operations. Make sure and stay tuned right here for more great content from Foodable Network. We'll catch you next time.